like to tell you an absolutely true story. Alex and Larry and Vicky and Jesse and myself all know it's true because we've all heard it straight from the mouth of the man that it's about. After 212 close air support combat missions, in Vietnam, Lieutenant Brian Scholl was shot down over Cambodia. He couldn't get out of his aircraft and he had to ride it into the jungle. When the aircraft came to rest in the trees, the plane and Brian were on fire. Due to his burns, he couldn't use his hands or his arms. He was not in pain because of the numbness and the shock, but he couldn't move. Finally, he was rescued by special forces and taken to Thailand. He was burned over 85% of his body. There was nothing they could do for him there, so they flew him to Kadena Air Force Base, Okinawa, Japan. The doctors there knew he would not survive. As Brian said later, they would let him die, put him in a box, and send him back home to his parents. But he didn't die. 2 months later, they flew him to Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and after 12 months and 15 surgeries and repeatedly being told, "You will never fly again, you're lucky just to be alive," he walked out of the hospital under his own power to a waiting blue Air Force staff car. While laying in his hospital bed, a 3-star general came into Brian's room, and he talked with Brian and told him that Brian's courage and will and grit was just the kind of person the Air Force needed in its ranks. The general told Brian when he gets out of the hospital, he should take the flying physical and try to get back on flying status. Brian was excited to hear this, but was skeptical. So he asked the general, "Just who are you to give such advice?" The general said that he was the Surgeon General of the Air Force, and if he signed off on Brian's physical, no one in the Air Force was going to argue with him going back to flying. Brian took the physical and passed it and returned to flying 2 days after he was released from the hospital. But the Air Force didn't know what to do with him. He became known as that all burned up guy. He looked awful because of all the scar tissue on his face, on his arms, on his hands, but inside he was very strong and fit. He went on to fly A-7s. He was an instructor in A-10s. He did 2 tours at Davis-Monthan, and then he taught at the Air Force Top Gun School at Nellis. And Larry and Gail, you might know him. His static call sign at Davis-Monthan was Punchy, so you may know him as Punchy. With all these accomplishments under his belt, there was only one thing he wanted to do before he left the Air Force and retired. He wanted to fly the world's fastest jet, the SR-71 Blackbird. To fly that aircraft, Brian had to pass a very, very difficult 2-day astronaut physical, and if he failed any part of that physical, he would be disqualified for ever flying anything again. He went to Travis Air Force Base, he took the physical, and scored the 6th highest score ever recorded at Travis. He flew the SR-71 for the last 4 years of his career, until the Air Force retired the Lady in Black in 1990. After Brian retired, he flew with the Air Force Thunderbirds for a full year and with the Navy Blue Angels as a photojournalist. Now, to appreciate what it means to fly the Blackbird, we need to understand a little bit about the aircraft. Only 93 men have ever flown the SR-71. It is the fastest, highest flying, air-breathing jet in the world, even today. It has no defensive weapons on board. It has no guns, no rockets, no missiles. Its only defense is speed and altitude. It will fly in a climb to 90,000 feet at Mach 3 plus and still have 4 inches of throttle left. If flying across Arizona from Phoenix to Prescott, it will fly that distance in 130 seconds, or in 115 seconds if you push it up just a little bit faster. At 17 miles high, it will photograph the ground with such detail that it can read your name badge as it flies over. To shoot it down with a ground-to-air missile, you must lead your shot by 27 miles. In 26 years, 4,500 enemy missiles were fired at the aircraft, and not one ever scratched the paint of a single jet. It is a 3-second aircraft. That means the pilot must read every gauge and every instrument in the cockpit every 3 seconds to stay ahead of the airplane. Finally, I'm getting to my point. After Brian left the Air Force, he was thinking about his life, that all burned up guy. And he asked his mother, "Mom, do you believe in miracles?" And she thought for a moment, and then she surprised Brian when she said, "No, Brian, I do not. I count on them." What did she mean by that? She meant that not only do I believe in some miracles, but I count on them as though they are a sure thing, or as they have already happened. I count on them. What are some of the things we count on today? The scriptures are the miracle we count on to be the very breath of God. Jesus is the miracle that we count on to be the Son of God. Jesus is the miracle we count on, who came from heaven to teach us what will make God happy with our lives. Like Alex told us this morning, we count on Jesus because he was our once and for all sacrifice for each one of us. Jesus is the miracle that we count on because he was raised from the tomb. Jesus is the miracle that we count on, who ascended back to heaven to be at the right hand of the Father. Jesus is the miracle that we count on to return for his bride, the church. Jesus is the miracle that we count on to save our spirit. And lastly, Jesus is the miracle we count on to be our Messiah, our high priest, and our king. Thank you.
Okay. Open up your Bibles, if you would, to Genesis chapter 5. Genesis chapter 5. I want to start off with a simple question this evening. How many kids did Adam and Eve have? Or had? How many kids did they have?
3 that we know of.
3 that we know of. Good answer. They had many sons and daughters. Genesis chapter 5, verses 1 through 5 says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam in the day when God created man. He made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and named them man in the day when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. Then the days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Adam that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Okay, so the question we're going to be taking a look at this evening is a question we looked at before, but it's been a while. It keeps cropping up. I've had several people ask me about it over the last 2 months, and that is, what is going on in Genesis chapter 6, the first few verses there. So we're going to take a look at that. It's important, I think, to start with Adam and to consider his children. Who was Adam's first kid? Cain. Who was the second kid? Abel. We know the story of what happened to those two, right? Abel was killed by his older brother. And what happened to Cain? Banished, right? And he was worried people might kill him, so God put a mark upon him that no one would touch him. He went off, built his own city, had his wife, and they had many children. And in chapter 4, we get a kind of small little genealogy of his family line. And whenever we see those, we'll see this also with Seth, or Adam, but as Seth. We'll see, get a little snapshot of the kind of people their kids are. And then of all the people that Moses could have put in there to kind of give you an idea of what the line would be like, he gives us Lamech. Remember Lamech? What was interesting about him? Yeah, chapter 4, look at verses 23 and following. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Wow. What a great guy. Is this somebody you want to run into on the street? Not really. Not really. Here in Genesis chapter 6, before I get that, I'm sorry. And then, at the very end of chapter 4, we read a little bit about Seth. It says, verse 26, to Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. And that happens after we get an idea of what Cain's children were like. Chapter 5 opens up. The New American Standard has the title there, Descendants of Adam, which it is, but the focus is really on Seth here. And we read quite a bit about that. And what person stands out, do you think, as a snapshot of the kind of kids Seth had? I mean, remember, if you're writing a genealogy and you want to give someone an idea that you want them to have about this line of people, over here with Cain, he did it with Lamech. He got an idea of what his family was like. Here in chapter 5, which one stands out as something kind of like a snapshot of this family of Seth? Enoch. What do we know about him?
God.
Right. He didn't die. He just was not. And the Lord took him. We see that there in verse 24. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So it kind of gives you an idea. So we see in the beginning of Genesis, the creation, the fall of man, what Cain ended up being like, killing Abel, and then what Seth ends up being like. And you're reading through this. Imagine you're reading through this for the first time, and you're thinking, oh man, what is going to happen? Because you got two kinds of people, right? What kind of people are Cain's people? They don't seem so great, do they? I mean, if it turns out to be the way Lamech is. And then you got Seth's people. What kind of people do they seem like? It's the kind of neighbor I want. They seem okay. So you may be wondering what's going to happen. But chapter 6 kind of throws everything up in the air. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So, the difficult parts that we run into here are the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the Nephilim. Sons of God. Let's deal with that one first. And there are some different ways people view this, the sons of God. We read a lot, and I think a lot of people understand them as being angels, and the Nephilim were their children. Sons of God have been interpreted as being possibly judges, and also sons of God could be the descendants of Seth. So I want us to look at these three, and we'll start with that first one that I don't know if it still is, but it was the dominant one when I was growing up. It's the way I was originally taught. It was the angels. So what would be a good argument for saying that the sons of God here in chapter 6 are angels? What would you say? Got a smile from Guy. He's got an answer, but he's holding back. He's going to give everyone a chance. All right, Guy. What do you think?
What was the question?
Oh, I'm putting to sleep already.
Well, the angels are referred to as sons of God in other places, like Job.
Like Job chapter 1, chapter 2, or later on also in, chapter 38, verse 7. That's right. Connor?
Not being made in the image of God, but being a son of God. Not being inspired by the image of God, right? Actually having, being made by God, but not inspired by his image. I suppose that's the...
Man was made by God too. Angels were made for a purpose, and there were some that fell. So I see what you're saying, though. So yeah, if you're reading through, you may think, well, that's different. Sons of God, maybe that's those up there with him, and that your mind could go to that. So, okay. People say that the Nephilim are their offspring, the angels coming down to be with the daughters of men. The New King James and the King James Version doesn't use the term Nephilim. Somebody have the New King James or King James? I think the Jones. What do they got? Giants. They've got giants there. The Yale literal translation actually has the word the fallen ones, who makes a lot of people think, oh, the fallen angels. So it must be all the bad angels. And so they see it that way. I think most go with the idea that it's giants. We see that word used quite a bit throughout, or not quite a bit, but here and in other places, we got to get that idea, I should say. But the root word here for Nephilim is translated, we find it 400 some times all throughout our Old Testament, and most of the time it's translated as fall, or fell, or fallen, cast, lying, a miscarriage, Nephilim, or giants. But generally fall, or fallen in some kind, and many other ways. What do you think? As far as we can go, I think that's about as strong of an evidence we have for angels. Sons of God, mentioned over in Job, yet the term used for fall, so maybe fallen angels. What do you think? Give me a percentage. The angels? Yeah, it's not working for me either. But that's what I, growing up, was always told. And I just believed it. So, looking at the context, I already gave you quite a bit of that already in chapter 4 of Genesis. You got Cain's line, and then also chapter 4, you got Seth's line. Cain's line, we kind of get an idea what kind of people they are. They seem rather ungodly. Seth's line, though, in verse 26, then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Where have we heard that line before? Well, yeah, I'm reading it from chapter 4. Yeah, there in Genesis. We know Joel is going to have a prophecy. He's going to say, bring up that same phrase, then men will call upon the name of the Lord. And Peter is going to quote from him in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost. And if you remember our study on that, what does it mean to call upon the name of the Lord? What does that mean? Submit to him in obedience. We're going to do what he says. We're going to worship the Lord. We're going to give over to him. And so we see that phrase used here for Seth's line. So when you come here to chapter 6, and if you're reading this for the first time, you've never read the Bible, you're probably thinking, man, what is going to happen? Like we said, what's going to happen between these two groups? You got this bad group and you got a good group. Well, we see it. The sons of God, I think, would have to be the descendants of Seth. They're the ones who call upon the name of the Lord. And they're called sons of God here. I was hoping this morning in the book of Romans, chapter 8, we would get to that second half that we didn't get to, because there in Romans 8:14, guess who's called sons of God? Christians are those who call upon the name of the Lord. We are. So I think here in chapter 6, the sons of God must be, in context at least, the line of Seth. It's them, those who are calling upon the name of the Lord. Because what's the one big thing that happens in Genesis 6 that we know about? What's going to happen? God's going to destroy the world with a flood because they get evil. And the sons of God are going to intermingle with the daughters of men. Who's that? That's got to be Cain's kids. They are fleshly. They are not calling upon the name of the Lord. And we read in several places in the Old Testament about the Lord telling people to be careful about marrying foreign wives. And Solomon did that, and what happened to Solomon? He got pulled away. And so you have this Seth's group. They begin to intermingle, it seems, with the line of Cain. And now they've fallen away. They got pulled away by these wives of theirs that are taking on from the line of Cain. Now, I want us to, I got to move my page. I want us to look at one other thing. But before we do that, any comments or any questions on sons of God and daughters of men? Do you see what I'm saying? Sons of God are Seth. The daughters of men are Cain. Any questions on it? Any comments?
Well, I guess it talks about their offspring being men of renown.
The Nephilim. We're getting ready to look at that here in just a second. So, but anything else before that, and then we'll take a look at that. So, good question. We're going to hit that next. All right. So let's deal with what Alex brought up there about the Nephilim. Okay. Where am I at? Okay. Yes. So, some say that the angel view that the Nephilim are the offspring, right, of this sons of God with the daughters of men. But let's read that text again. The Nephilim, this is verse 4 of chapter 6. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. What days is that?
Before the flood.
Okay, before the flood, but in the context, because we haven't even read about that yet, it's the days when the sons of men came to the sons of God came to the daughters of men. It's those days. They were already on the earth, and also afterward. when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men. So they were there before they had relations, and they were there after. And then he gives us a bit of a description. And they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Okay. Now, before we dive any further in describing it here, let's deal with some possible misconceptions. Put your marker there in chapter 6, and then turn over to Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. You may recognize this as the spies that went into Canaan and came back and 10 were bad and 2 were good, right? We got Joshua and Caleb. Joshua's not here tonight, but Caleb is. Caleb gave a good report. Good job, Caleb. The other 10 did not. Verse 33, here they are. Remember, they went out to Canaan. They spied it out. They're coming back, and they're giving a bad report. And part of their report is this in verse 33. There also we saw the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight. Okay. Question. Did the Nephilim survive the flood? No. They died. Uh-oh. We found a contradiction in the Bible. Throw it out, right? How do we deal with this? All right, put yourself in the shoes of these 10. They are already saying we can't take the land. So apparently when they were out there scouting around, they got scared. They got worried. Man, I've had my kids come running to me, Dad, there's a bug in the bathroom. I'm like, okay, what kind of bug is it? Is it a spider? It's so big. Is it? Yes. Can you deal with it? I like, just step on it, use a tissue, and throw it in the toilet. No, Dad, you do it. I come in there, I'm looking for this big bug in the bathroom. Do you know what I find? Little bitty bug. I don't even know what kind it is. It is harmless. Harmless. But they do what? What did they do? What do we call it? They exaggerated. We can't take Canaan. Man, we are so small. We're like grasshoppers. It's the Nephilim. Now, where do you think, if the Nephilim didn't survive the flood, where did they get the idea? How do they know what a Nephilim was?
Stories. Passed down stories.
Okay, or maybe Moses has already started writing the book of Genesis. If Moses was writing the book of Genesis and began to write, let's say you're there, you're an Israelite, and you know he's writing about how the world began. Would you want to read it? Yeah, I would. And guess what they read about in there? This Nephilim. Men of renown. Oh man, they're like the Nephilim. I think that's what they're doing. They're making a comparison. They're trying to put fear into the Israelites to not go into Canaan. I think they're exaggerating. Now, were there some big guys in there? Yeah. Who? Goliath, his brothers. Did they have an army of giants? No. But they had a few big guys. They were scared. And I think they probably read or maybe heard a story about this because Moses had been writing it down, and they were exaggerating. This is not the same ones. The same thing. I don't think. I think they're just exaggerating. So let's come back to chapter 6, and let's see if we can figure out who these guys are, these Nephilim. Okay. So, Nephilim, back in verse 4, they were on the earth in those days and also afterward. We already talked about that, not before and after the flood, but in the days of the sons of God marrying with the daughters of men. This is not, nor is this saying that the Nephilim were the children of these unions. That they weren't. They were there, and they were part of marrying in once another. They also had kids with the Seth's line as well. So I think, again, Moses is simply showing us another reason for the coming of the flood. We have these two phrases, mighty men, men of renown. Mighty men is a word that is also used to describe Gideon. When the angel came, found Gideon, what did he call him? He was in the vat. Oh, come on. My teacher's right here. Come on, guys. What did the angel say to Gideon? When he came and he found him the vat, and the angel came down and he said, oh,
Mighty man of valor or something?
oh, mighty man. Oh, valiant warrior. Valiant warrior. Oh, man, we're going to have to go back to adult pew packers on Wednesdays, guys. All right. Valiant warrior. The Hebrew word for renown. So you got mighty men. That's a valiant warrior. Or you got men of renown. The renown word is typically translated as name. Name. Men of name. What do you think of that? I'm going to go out there into the world and I'm going to make a name for myself. Now you're reading through Genesis. What one person stands out who is out there trying to make a name for himself? Well, there in chapter 4, what about Lamech? I think he was that kind of guy. Now, you so much as touch me the wrong way and you're toast. I'm going to kill you. He had a name. People knew who he was. He had a reputation. I see arrogant men here. I see these Nephilim as arrogant men, warriors. And all of this seems to point to only two groups. Cain's family and Seth's family. That's all we know about as readers. And now, Seth's family is starting to intermarry with Cain's, and what happened? Now it's only evil. What happened to all those people who were calling on the name of the Lord? At the end of chapter 4 or chapter 5. What happened to them? They married the other people, those in the world. We always tend to tell our kids, marry a Christian, don't we? Why? What's the danger? Influence. Bad company corrupts good morals. We've got to be careful. Solomon, the wisest man in the world, surrounded himself with the wrong people. What happened? He fell away. Always amazes me every time I read through that story. He would do that. Man, he was so smart. Too smart, I guess. And so, for Genesis chapter 6, that's what I think. I think the sons of God are the line of Seth, the daughters of men are the line of Cain, and the mighty men, the Nephilim, are the arrogant men who are out there making a name for themselves. That's what I think. Now, that's my opinion. What do you think? I hope that helps in your study. I do not think it can be angels, nor do I think they had children and the children were called Nephilim. That doesn't even stick well with the context or the text. Grammatically, it doesn't work because they were there before and already and after they had those relations happening between the two groups. So I think they are part of the Cain group, those men of renown.
So you think this term giants does not necessarily relate to size?
Well, the term is most of the time representing those who are fallen. It is the idea of it is given by those 10 men coming out of Canaan because they're, I think, referencing back to what they read here, the way they understood it. Could it be giants? Well, I guess, yeah, sure.
we use that terminology today when we talk about someone as a giant in his area of
Expertise.
expertise.
Yeah,
That
and it
doesn't
could be that. They were
mean that he's a
giant sinners.
big person who's just prominent in his field.
Yeah.
Or her field.
And that's good, because that fits in with the idea of renown, making a name for themselves in this world. They were people that were well known in whatever field it could be. And we do know that Cain's line, they had a lot of things they did. They created and made a lot of things. They made a good name for themselves in their creations and what they made. So yeah, I think that could be right. That's a good point of view there.
Well, what about the description that we have of the king of Og? Who was,
Who's also a big fella on the big bed.
yeah, you know, because it describes the size of his bed, and, you know, the
Okay. So he was a big fella.
13 feet long, but it also described him as being the last of the Nephilim, I thought.
I don't think it describes him as being the last of the Nephilim. I don't think that's.
I thought it, or the Rephaim, but I thought that those were the same, essentially the same.
Well, it can't be the same Nephilim from chapter 6. They die in the flood. They don't make it. The sons of, what was it? Anak? I mean, they were clearly big people, but Goliath wasn't part of that family. He was another family. And, I mean, he was a pretty big giant, 9 foot, 9 inches tall. And so I'm sure there were other big men, and we know there were. But not the Nephilim from Genesis chapter 6.
Yeah.
Those are referencing, I think, the men of renown from Cain's line. It's just a different group. Do we want to call them Nephilim and apply it as a giant? Sure. But that doesn't seem to be the case here in chapter 6 of Genesis. I don't think there's a connection between those groups. They're separate.
Yeah, no, I agree with your, you know, synopsis of that. But there clearly were giants. I mean, that, when they described King of Og, his bed was 13 feet.
Oh yeah, he was huge. Well, I'm not saying there were no giants, but I'm just saying that here in chapter 6,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, clearly there were. I mean, Goliath. There were good name. All right. Any other comments? John?
In this paragraph that we just studied, verse 3 doesn't seem to fit. It seems to be off the subject, off what's going on.
Oh, okay.
And- I'm sorry.
I said, okay. Go ahead.
And then the 120 years, you know, man's lifespan didn't dramatically drop off at that point. Noah lived almost 1,000 years.
All right, let's look at that.
Comments on that third verse?
Sure. So verse 3 says, chapter 6, Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever. Let's stop there for a second. Well, because he also is flesh. Let's stop there for a second. He's talking about their way of thinking. Because you got two. You got Cain's way of thinking and then Seth's group, and they call upon the name of the Lord. They're obedient to the Lord. So his spirit, his mind, his heart, his way of seeing things isn't going to strive. He sees that. And then he says, because he's also flesh, he's fulfilling the desires of the flesh, nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. I don't think that's in reference to how long we're going to be as our life is going to start tapping off at that. But in 120 years, the flood's going to come. And then that's going to end this problem for good. Well, not for good. I take that back. But it's going to end this problem.
So the flood happened 120 years after this event in the paragraph?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Anything else? Okay. I hope that helps. For those who were asking about it, I hope it's helpful. Something to think about. Chew on, look at the passage, look at the concept, see if I'm right. If I'm wrong in any way, let me know. I'm more than willing to take a look.